Introduction to the Book of Ezra. Beginning again. For the exiles from Babylon, news almost too good to be true. Many of the older priests and Levites and family heads who had seen the former temple wept aloud, while many others shouted for joy. That's according to chapter 3, verse 12. Ezra begins with exiles returning to a ruined city. A brush-covered ghost town, burned and pillaged, 50 years before by an overpowering Babylonian army. Would Jerusalem now have a new beginning? Psalm 126 captures the returning exiles' feelings. To quote, "We were like men who dreamt or who dreamed, and our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with songs of joy." The Persian Empire had conquered mighty Babylon and, under the Emperor Cyrus, offered all Jews a chance to return to their land. It was too good to believe. A new start with God. One poet in exile had written, "If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill." Check on Psalm 137, verse 5. These returned exiles were the minority who, decades afterwards, had not forgotten. They treasured their spiritual heritage more than the houses and businesses they had built in Babylon. They wanted to live and worship in the place God had given His people. Any sacrifice was worth this opportunity. Their first impulse when they arrived was to rebuild the temple, God's hope. The tolerant Persians, whose official policy was to encourage the local religion in every area they governed, had even brought out the silver and gold temple articles. The silver and gold temple articles, carefully preserved in Babylonian temple, as though waiting on God's timing. When the returned exiles laid the foundation to the new temple, the sound of their shouting and noisy weeping could be heard from far away, according to chapter 3, verse 13. The temple, after all, was the place where they would meet God. It symbolized a new start with Him. The problems of beginning again. God had opened the way, but the exiles needed determination to follow it. The book of Ezra divides into 3 parts, each one dealing with an obstacle that arose. The first part tells how immediately after the return of the exiles, their neighbors in the surrounding countryside became hostile. After their bogus offer of help, was turned down, these neighbors began a campaign of opposition. They managed to stop further progress on the temple. It lay in ruins for nearly 20 more years, until the prophets Haggai and Zechariah, whose messages are recorded in the books named after them, again stirred up interest in building. This second push is described in chapters 5 and 6. When opposition arose this time, the Israelites managed to push through, again with the assistance of the Persian king. Another problem preoccupies the final 4 chapters. Ezra, the man after whom this book is named, actually arrived in Jerusalem during this period, 80 years after the first party. The temple had by then been up for half a century, but the new beginning stood in severe jeopardy again. The Israelites had begun to mingle and compromise their faith with the hostile people around them. Ezra's leadership, which came from deep biblical faith and genuine sorrow over sin, forced a radical, painful solution. Ezra leads up to Jesus. The book of Ezra introduces an entirely new period in Israel's history, a period in which they became more like a church than a nation. Israelites, before the exile, had given much of their energy to fighting enemy armies. Now, they focused on fighting sin and spiritual compromise. The minority who returned could build a temple only with the permission of a foreign government in Persia. They had lost political independence, yet they clung to their religion, especially to the Old Testament scriptures and temple worship. They feared repeating the mistakes that had sent them into exile. True, they did flirt with spiritual compromise. Yet, when God's prophet spoke, people responded. As those who had chosen a ruined Jerusalem over a prosperous Babylon, the returned Jews looked to God instead of the government for help. Still, they dreamed or dreamt more than ever of the powerful Messiah the prophets promised. This dream and their strong determination to obey the law of God continued right up until the time of Jesus, about 450 years after Ezra's last words. How to read the Book of Ezra. The Book of Ezra describes several highly emotional events, yet it reads like a historical report, citing official documents, letters, and lists written over 80 years span. You're often left to imagine for yourself the feelings of the returning exiles. The book can, therefore, seem confusing and dry unless you take time to imagine how the scenes must have looked and to reflect on how people must have felt. The three distinct periods Ezra deals with all have the same theme: a new beginning for God's people. In each situation, God gave opportunity and the outside world threatened it. God's people drifted back and forth in their response. Carefully take note of the messages from both God and the world and how the Israelites responded. Examine Ezra's model as an unwavering man of the law as well as of deep personal faith. To understand how Ezra fits into Israel's long-term pattern of response to God and the world, read some historical background. Articles on Ezra, Haggai, or Israel, or history of in a Bible dictionary may offer the best summary. The short book of Haggai zeroes in on the crucial months described in Ezra chapter 5 verses 1 to 2 and makes a valuable companion to any study of Ezra. Plans for reading Ezra. For Plan 1, an overview of Ezra in one day. So for Day 1, read the introduction to Ezra, just like what we've done, and proceed to Chapter 3 for the emotional story of how the returning exiles laid the foundation for the new temple. For Plan 2, all of Ezra in 9 days. There are 10 chapters, 1 chapter a day, except for Day 1, when we're going to read both chapters 1 and 2. Alright, so for the book of Ezra, Plan 1, Introduction, then proceed to Chapter 3. For Plan 2, 10 chapters in 9 days. Because for Day 1 or in Day 1, we read both chapters 1 and 2. Alright, that's all for now. God bless us all.